Hello everyone, I'm Tatiana,
And I'm Amanda.
and we will be your MCs for today's event. Today we are celebrating Halloween 2020. As we all know, Halloween is celebrated every year around the world on the 31st of October, with big parties and trick or treating. However, we are doing things differently this year, hence the online event we're hosting today.
The rundown for this year's Halloween event will be as follows. Firstly, a blood curdling story about the Salem Witch Trials, which would be followed by a haunting poem, and then a presentation about how Halloween is celebrated in different countries. And this would be further followed with a quiz and a compilation video. And last but not least, as a treat for the end of this event, a game of Would You Rather, Halloween edition.
A man whose words fit in the spirit of Halloween, Vincent Price once said, "It is as much fun to scare as to be scared." So without further ado, we will start off with the story of the infamous Salem Witch Trials, which would be presented by Georgia, Noe, and Dong.
Hello, so today my group, Donghyun and Noe, will be presenting on the Salem Witch Trials. So let's get started on the introduction. The Salem Witch Trials were a series of persecutions in which over 200 people were accused of practicing witchcraft. They took place in a number of cities in Massachusetts Bay Colony in the years 1692 and 1693, but primarily in the towns of Salem. Did people really believe in witches? During the late 17th century, the Puritans of New England believed that witchcraft was the work of the devil and was very real. Throughout the late Middle Ages and into the 1600s, thousands of people were executed in Europe for being witches. What started the trials? The witch trials in Salem began with two little girls. Betty Paris, age 9, and Abigail Williams, age 11, began to have strange fits. They would twitch and scream, making strange animal noises. They claimed they felt as if they were being pinched and stuck with pins. The girls blamed their condition on witchcraft. They said that 3 women in the village had cast spells on them. Tibuta, the girl servant who had told them stories on witchcraft, Sarah Good, a local beggar and a homeless person, and Sarah Osborne, an old lady who rarely came to church.
This led to mass hysteria. Soon the entire town of Salem and the villages around them were in panic. It didn't help that Tituba, the girl servant, confessed to being a witch and making deal with the devil. People began to blame everything bad that happened on witchcraft. Hundreds of people were accused of being witches, and the local pastors of Puritan churches began to have trials to determine who was and who wasn't a witch.
How did they determine who wasn't a witch or was a witch? There were a number of tests used to determine if a person was a witch. First, the touch test. The person afflicted with fits would come calm when touching the witch who cast the spell on them. Second, confessions by dunking. They would dunk an accused witch in the water until they finally confessed.
Third, Lord's Prayer. If a person could not recite Lord's Prayer without error, they were considered a witch. Fourth, special evidence. The accused would claim to have seen a witch in their dreams, working with the devil.
5. Submersion. In the test to test the accused was bound to drop in the water. If they floated, they were considered a witch. Of course, if they didn't float, they would drown. 6. Pressing. In this test, heavy stones would be placed on the accused. This was supposed to force the confession out of the witch. Unfortunately, the person being pressed couldn't breathe to give them a confession, even if they wanted to. An 80-year-old man named Giles Corey was crushed to death when this test was used on him.
How many were killed? At least 20 people were put to death during the trials. Over 150 more were jailed, and some people died due to poor conditions in jail. How did the trials end? As more and more people were being accused, the public began to realize that innocent people were being condemned to death. After months of trials, the governor finally decided to put an end to the trials, with the last trials being held in May of 1693. The governor pardoned the rest of the accused witches, and they were released from jail.
Now, we will watch a video on what really happened during the Salem Witch Trials.
You've been accused of a crime you did not commit. It's impossible to prove your innocence. If you insist that you're innocent anyway, you'll likely be found guilty and executed. But if you confess, apologize, and implicate others for good measure, you'll go free. Do you give a false confession or risk a public hanging? This was the choice facing those accused of witchcraft in the village of Salem, Massachusetts, between February 1692 and May 1693. They were the victims of paranoia about the supernatural, misdirected religious fervor, and a justice system that valued repentance over truth. Salem was settled in 1626 by Puritans, a group of English Protestants. Life was strict and isolated for the people of Salem. Battles with their Native American neighbors and groups of French settlers were commonplace. People feared starvation and disease, and relations between villagers were strained. To make matters worse, 1692 brought one of the coldest winters on record. That winter, two cousins, 9-year-old Betty Paris and 11-year-old Abigail Williams, started behaving very strangely. A physician found nothing physically wrong, but diagnosed the girls as under an evil hand. Puritans believed that the devil wreaked havoc in the world through human agents, or witches, who blighted nature, conjured fiendish apparitions, and tormented children. As news swept through the village, the symptoms appeared to spread. Accounts described 12 so-called afflicted girls contorting their bodies, having fits and complaining of prickling skin. 4 of the girls soon accused 3 local women of tormenting them. All 3 of the accused were considered outsiders in some way. On February 29th, the authorities arrested Sarah Good, a poor pregnant mother of a young daughter, Sarah Osborne, who had long been absent from church and was suing the family of one of her accusers, and Tituba, an enslaved woman in Betty Paris's home known by her first name only. Tituba denied harming the girls at first, but then she confessed to practicing witchcraft on the devil's orders and charged Good and Osborne with having forced her. Osborne and Good both maintained their innocence. Osborne died in prison, while Good's husband turned against her in court, testifying that she was a witch or would be one very quickly. Good's 4-year-old daughter was imprisoned and eventually gave testimony against her mother. Meanwhile, Good gave birth in jail. Her baby died, and she was convicted and hanged shortly thereafter. Tituba was held in custody until May and then released. These 3 victims were just the beginning. As accusations multiplied, others, like Tituba, made false confession to save themselves. The authorities even reportedly told one accused witch that she would be hanged if she did not confess and freed if she did. They were not particularly interested in thoroughly investigating the charges. In keeping with their church's teachings, they preferred that the accused confessed, asked for forgiveness, and promised not to engage in more witchcraft. The court accepted all kinds of dubious evidence, including so-called spectral evidence, in which the girls began raving when supposedly touched by invisible ghosts. Complicating matters further, many of the jurors in the trials were relatives of the accusers, compromising their objectivity. Those who dared to speak out, such as Judge Nathaniel Saltonstall, came under suspicion. By the spring of 1693, over 100 people had been imprisoned, and 14 women and 6 men had been executed. By this time, accusations were starting to spread beyond Salem to neighboring communities, and even the most powerful figures were targets. When his own wife was accused, the governor of Massachusetts colony suspended the trials. Sentences were amended, prisoners released, and arrests stopped. Some have speculated that the girls were suffering from hallucinations caused by fungus, or a condition that caused swelling of the brain. But ultimately, the reason for their behavior is unknown. What we do know is that adults accepted wild accusations by children as hard evidence. Today, the Salem Witch Trials remain a cautionary tale of the dangers of groupthink and scapegoating, and the power of fear to manipulate human perception. Weaponized accusations of witchcraft were a
In a famous Scottish play shrouded with witches, misdirection, and death, a line stands, "Something wicked this way comes." That something wicked is this very poem, The Haunted Palace, written by Edgar Allan Poe, now brought to life and recited by Nisha.
Okay. The Haunted Palace by Edgar Allan Poe. In the greenest of our valleys, by good angels tenanted, once a fair and stately palace, radiant palace, reared its head. In its monarch thought's dominion, it stood